Hello, Year 9. We're gonna have to go a little bit backwards now. So I know over your previous four lessons, we have looked at the causes of World War Two. If you remember in the very first lesson that I narrated for you guys, I did say that for Jewish resistance, which is basically what your assessment was going to be on, that we were going to do that when we were back in school. That was obviously on Monday, and then lockdown happened. So we know now that we won't be back in school to do that. So we're going to have to just push forward with it, okay? The assessment is going to take a different form. I'm not entirely sure. Mr. Gregory is working on it today, but we are going to start working on the lesson for it. So what we've got today, this is 2 lessons worth of work. Okay, so 2 lessons, and you need to remember that. So it's completely up to you if you want to plow through all of this today and do it, and then for your next lesson that you have with me, you just need to make sure that you've submitted it to me, or you can do half today and half in your next lesson. Now 9S, guys, it's completely up to you how you do it, but bear in mind when this is going to be set, there is quite a large gap between this and the next lesson. There's a week, unfortunately, which is just the way your timetable is. So have a really good think about if you just want to crack on with it, knowing that you'll get that hour back if you spend a little bit longer today on it. You know that you'll get that time back, because for your next history lesson you'll have done the work. But I'll leave it up to you, okay? This is completely up to you to do. So your title for today, guys, is Jewish resistance to the Holocaust. It's just important there, that word in brackets, show up. That is what the Jewish people call the Holocaust, all right? So they don't call it the Holocaust, they call it the Shoah. So that's why we've put that in brackets. And lesson objective, to describe different ways in which Jews fought back during the Shoah. All right, so get that written down. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know that this lesson is largely you guys cracking on. So there's only less than 5 minutes of me talking, and then you are just going to be left to it. So quick starter, I want you to just have a little bit of a think. What ways might Jewish people have resisted? Okay, and they don't necessarily have to be Jewish people. So there were people that weren't Jewish that thought what was happening to Jewish people was wrong. Okay, and we looked at some of them when we looked at the 4 different people. Okay, so have a think, see if you can remember what sort of things they did to resist, and also what Jewish people could have done to resist what was happening to them. So think about the process they went through. So, well, they were evicted from their homes. Everything they owned was taken from them. They were put into ghettos. They were put onto trains. They were sent to camps. So just keep that journey in your head, and then see if you can think anywhere along that journey, what sort of things could they have done to stop that happening, no matter how small it is or how big it is, okay? I want you to try and come up with at least 4. Just write a little list for me. All right, so the reality of resistance, guys. So to resist means to fight back, okay? To say, no, I'm not doing this. This isn't right, okay? That's what we mean by resistance. So Jewish resistance really did take a lot of different forms. So I asked you there previously to just list a few of the things. But things such as they fought back. So they tried to fight back against what was happening with them. They tried to get babies and children, all right, out of the situation of being sent off to camps. And we know that Irina Sendler, our 4th person that we looked at, she did that. She smuggled them out in doctors' bags and things, didn't she, from the ghetto, to rescue them. They wrote down what was happening to them, okay, knowing that in the future this sort of thing would really be looked into. So they wrote honest accounts of their experiences and how awful it was. Artwork. All right, so they fought back by creating artwork showing their experiences. They formed secret schools, okay, because obviously first all Jewish children were expelled from school, okay, and they were sent to Jewish only schools, and then they were eventually closed down because by this point the Nazis knew those children weren't going to make it to adulthood, so why would they need to be in school? So they set up secret schools to enable Jewish children to still be able to learn. And then theatre, okay, so this idea of putting on plays, you know, that sort of thing, to is a way of resistance. As crazy as it sounds, it is a way of saying, no, you're not going to affect how we live our lives. We are going to do this and we're going to carry on. So just over on the top right there, military resistance. So for Jews, same as for non-Jews, this was really only an option for a minority. By military resistance, it means not joining up with the army. All right. It's important to realise that resistance really could extend beyond conventional notions of sort of armed struggle. So that wasn't the only way to resist by them, a Jewish person saying, I'm not fighting, I'm not joining up with this army, I'm not being part of this. There are actually lots of different ways, like the ways on the left, that Jewish people did to stand up for themselves and to say no. And given that, you know, what the Nazis really wanted to do was to extinguish, which means to stop, to put out. Okay, so if you extinguish a fire, you're putting it out. So they really wanted to extinguish Jewish life and culture. So attempts to try and preserve that are seen as a form of resistance. So, for example, the theatre, the secret schools. Okay, so just trying to preserve regular life is a way of fighting back. When we think of resistance and fighting back, you guys will get in your heads the idea of, you know, Jewish people trying to fight Nazi soldiers. That wasn't what it was. Okay, sometimes that was what it was. Of course it was, and we will look at some of those examples as you go through this lesson. But small things, small acts are seen as resistance. Okay. So this historian here, okay, Yehuda Bauer, he's attempted to define what resistance is, and he's using a Hebrew, which is a Jewish word called amadar, all right? And it doesn't really translate very well, but it basically means to stand up against. So I'm just going to read through the information, okay? So what does amadar include? It includes smuggling food into ghettos, mutual self-sacrifice within the family to avoid starvation or worse, cultural, educational, religious and political activities taken to strengthen morale. Morale is the general feeling, okay? So at the moment we're in lockdown, everyone is feeling fairly miserable. The morale in the country isn't great. When everyone has been vaccinated and coronavirus is gone, the morale in this country is going to be great, isn't it? Okay, it's going to be much better. The work of doctors, nurses and educators to consciously maintain health and moral fibre to enable individual and group survival. And of course, armed rebellion or the use of force. So he has come up with lots of different ways there that come up as standing up against what was happening to them, from smuggling food into ghettos so that Jewish people in ghettos weren't starving, to armed rebellion, so using weapons to fight back. So they're two very different things, aren't they? Okay, still both examples of resistance. So Bauer noted that one should be careful not to exaggerate. The Holocaust brought misery and destruction, and it was only human that many people succumbed to despair and that ties of communal and familial solidarity were often frayed. Okay, so he's basically saying it was human that people let what was happening to them take over. They couldn't always fight back. It wasn't always possible. Okay, is it wrong, writes Bauer, to demand in retrospect that these tortured individuals and communities should have behaved as heroes? Rather, the fact that so many of them did is a matter of wonder. So it's basically saying, should they all have fought back because of what was happening? And if they'd all have fought back together collectively, would the outcome have been different? He's actually saying that was just impossible. Okay, but we need to look at it as the fact that so many of them fought back despite these awful things that were happening to them. That's amazing. All right, so that's what he's saying. So what I want you very quickly to do, it says quick task there. I want you to just explain to me what amadar is and what it includes. Okay, so you're looking mainly at that top paragraph there and the very top sentence as well. Very quickly, just one or two sentences. All right, so we're moving on to your task, and you'll be really pleased to know that until you get to the table at the very end, this is the last that you're going to hear from me, okay? So this is a student-led task, and this is exactly how we would have done it in class, except you probably would have worked with a partner. So what you're going to do, you're going to begin this task, and this is where I'm saying you can continue it into next lesson. Do as much as you want to today. All right. If you want to work through all of these sources, then you go for it and answer all of the questions. If you want to do it half and half, okay, then I'll explain a bit further down where a halfway point is, where you can stop if you want to. Either way, you've got to make sure you submit all of your answers and the table, which is at the end, to me with a photo, okay, or an email by the end of the day of your next history lesson. So the following sources that you're going to look at, they come from the Holocaust Educational Trust, all right, and that is set up to educate young people on the Holocaust. And so the resources on there are fantastic, okay? So your aim when you're looking at these sources is to understand the different ways in which Jewish people demonstrated Amadar, standing up, resistance, saying no, okay, during the Holocaust. So what you're going to do, you're going to look through each source, and you'll see there as you move through, it's very simple to understand. So you're going to look through the source, read through the questions. Now the questions are red bullet points. They're not listed as questions, but you'll see them at the bottom. They're red bullet points. And you're going to answer each question for each source, okay? Remember, double lessons worth of work, okay? If you do want to do this in 2 halves, if you get to and finish the one that says flask found in Auschwitz, that's about a halfway point. As I said, if you want to continue onwards, then continue on, get it all done, totally up to you. And then if you do that, next lesson, you need to just pick up where you left off. This PowerPoint will still be up on the system, okay? I'll put the end date as your next history lesson, and then you need to complete the table at the very end. Bearing in mind, your assessment is going to be sort of based on Jewish resistance. So you do need to make sure you're doing this task properly. So no more talking from me now, okay? And until you get to the table at the very end, where I'm only going to talk briefly. Okay, so we've got this table. Now, as you can see, the left-hand side of the table has been completed. You don't need to add anything to the left-hand side of the table. This is stuff we already know. Okay, so if you look at the heading, evidence to suggest there wasn't resistance to the Holocaust. So this is saying people were just accepting of their situation, and here is evidence for that. Okay. What we are looking at is the right-hand side of the table, so evidence to suggest there was resistance to the Holocaust. Now, all of those different sources that you have just looked at are evidence of different types of resistance, so things that Jewish people did to say no, to fight back, no matter how small they were. Okay, so what I need you to do is go back, look at the different sources, and see if you can put a sentence together for each one. All right. So for example, the first one was on the Sobibor uprising. Okay, and they were prisoners in a camp and they rebelled. All right. They rebelled. Some of them escaped, but a lot of them were killed. So they actually turned around in the camp and said, we're not having this. All right. So the evidence of that, first one, Sobibor uprising, the prisoners rebelled, and however many it was, I think 300 or whatever, managed to escape. Okay, doesn't matter that it wasn't successful and that a lot of them were murdered at the end. What matters is they stood up to what was happening, and that's what we need to concentrate on. Okay, have a go, then look at your second picture, see if you can put a sentence together about what is happening, what was the resistance that was happening here. If you find this really difficult, okay, obviously by the end of this you need to have a completed table, so you've got to copy out the ones on the left regardless, all right, and then you are adding in your own ones onto the right hand side. If you find this very tricky, on the next page is a completed table. However, please try not to just copy from my information, okay, because you're not learning anything that way. All right, have a go at doing it yourself, and then you can have a look at my table if you need to. Now, when you send it to me, if you've just sent to me my copied table, then I'm probably going to send you a comment back saying, you know, what was it that you found difficult and things like that, okay? So if you are stuck, have a look at the next slide. All right, final bit from me then. So this is the completed right-hand side of the table that I've just done, the same as you guys. I read the sources exactly the same as you, okay? Each bullet point covers each of the sources in order that they were. So going right back to the start, you've got the rebellion by the prisoners at the Sobibor camp. 300 of them escaped. The partisans in Vilna, they escaped the ghettos, and some of them engaged in armed fighting with the Nazis in the forest. That was that guerrilla warfare, okay? Third one, Jewish Dutch children were rescued from being sent to Auschwitz, okay? And they were being held in a transit camp, which is basically a holding camp before they're sent to Auschwitz. They've gone from a ghetto to a holding camp, and then from there they're sent on trains to Auschwitz. And while they were at that holding camp, they were rescued. All right, and it said that they were snuck out in bags and things like that. Number 4, Greek Jews in Auschwitz wrote diaries about their experiences, and they hid them. Okay, they hid them around the camp. The idea being that in the future someone will find them. At the end of the war, if they'd survived, they could go back, dig these up. This is our experience. This is what happened to us. Okay. Next one, the Oneg Shabbat archives. So that was basically a time capsule, okay, and that was created by a historian living in the Warsaw Ghetto. So he wanted to show what life was like in that Warsaw Ghetto, which was in Poland. All right, it was the biggest ghetto in Poland, and he wanted to show what life was like there. So he created a time capsule, which was then buried underground. Next one, we've got the painting. Okay, so the painting, sorry, I've spelt the word illustrate completely wrong there. Painting to illustrate the experiences of the Jews in the camps. However, what's different about this particular painting is that this camp, where this artist did these paintings, was a camp used for quite high up Jewish people. All right, and it was the one that the Nazis used to send out to all of the German people to show, oh, you know, these camps aren't all bad. Look, you know, this isn't too bad. Obviously, we know that it was very, very different now. Okay, but paintings, that was the artist's way of resisting. She was sent to a camp. She was eventually executed, but she showed what it was like in those camps, and you can see she's got her Jewish Star of David there quite proudly on the wall. All right, to show, yes, I am a Jew, but yes, I'm proud of being a Jew. It's a poster in this room that I'm in. And then you've got the final one, was the use of theatre, and that's to preserve Jewish culture, okay? And you can see there that the theatre, the plays were performed in the Lodz ghetto, all right, to boost the morale. You know, these ghettos were horrible places. People were starving. People were living in very cramped, unclean conditions. So the idea that people still tried to carry on with normal life, let's go and see this play that they're putting on, was to just boost morale. So just saying, look, I know it's awful, but look, there is still this, you know, let's go and watch this. All right. The final one, which was the little case study on the Jewish medical student who stopped the train. You don't really need to put that one. It's just a really interesting piece of information, but it's another act of resistance in that he stopped the train, but that's a sort of one-off situation that didn't happen very often. But he's very cool that he managed to do that just with those few tools that he had. And obviously he was executed because he managed to do this, but in doing so, he saved the lives of a lot of people. So please make sure you've got a table completed, guys, either with your own information or my information. Make sure you copy down the information on the left-hand side as well. And you need to send me your picture of this as your completed task for this lesson, along with your questions, or at least some of your questions, please. And I will see you next lesson.